Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to unpack something that we all experience every single day.
Yeah.
Consumer behavior.
Oh,
And
yeah,
I've
nice.
got to say, the research we have in front of us is truly fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a textbook here that focuses specifically on European consumer habits. And then we have some really interesting case studies
Mm-hmm.
from across the globe. And it really makes you think about the why behind our buying decisions.
It does. It really does.
Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Mm.
I think consumer behavior is so much more than just, strolling down the aisles and picking things off the shelves.
Right.
It's a very complex process influenced by psychology, culture, personal values, and even our own sense of self.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Okay.
Our textbook breaks down consumer attitudes into three core components.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing, feeling, and doing.
Mm-hmm.
It seems pretty straightforward, right?
It does seem simple on the surface,
Yeah.
but the interplay between these components is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Take the example of a high-involvement purchase.
Okay.
That new digital camera you might have your eye on, knowing is all about gathering the facts, the specs, the features.
Right.
But that doesn't automatically translate to feeling the emotional response, the desire, the sense that I've got to have this.
Right.
And even then, both knowing and feeling don't guarantee doing the actual purchase.
So it's not just a linear process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The hierarchy of effects model shows us that the order in which these components come into play can vary wildly.
Okay.
Sometimes a strong emotion, feeling, can override logic knowing and lead to an impulse purchase.
Oh, yeah.
Ever bought something and then wondered, why did I do that?
Yes.
That happens to the best of us.
I can definitely relate to that. Now, what about the forces behind these attitudes? What motivates us to act in the first place?
So motivation is a driving force. It's an internal tension that pushes us to satisfy a need or achieve a goal.
Okay.
And these needs aren't all created equal. We have utilitarian needs. These are practical, functional, like buying groceries to fuel our bodies.
Yes.
Then we have hedonic needs. These are driven by pleasure, enjoyment,
Yes.
emotional satisfaction.
Okay.
Like that spontaneous weekend trip you booked because you needed an escape.
So it's the classic battle between what we need and what we want.
Exactly.
Speaking of needs, our textbook mentions Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Right.
a framework that's often used in marketing.
It's a popular model, but it has been widely critiqued.
Okay.
The idea that we neatly climb a pyramid from basic needs to higher level needs, like self-actualization,
Right.
doesn't always reflect reality.
Okay.
In the real world, things are much more fluid. Think about someone who skips a meal to buy a book,
Right.
prioritizing their intellectual curiosity,
Right.
even when a basic need isn't fully met.
That really challenges the rigid structure of that pyramid. Now, something that I find incredibly fascinating is the idea that our possessions can become extensions of ourselves,
Yes.
contributing to our identity and shaping how we see ourselves.
It's this fascinating concept of the extended self. Our possessions, from our clothes and cars to even something as simple as a favorite mug,
Right.
can become integrated into our sense of who we are. These items tell a story about our tastes,
Well,
our values, our
yeah.
experience.
It's like they become a part of our personal narrative.
And speaking of narratives, the influence of gender roles on consumption is something we can't ignore.
Right.
Society bombards us with messages about what it means to be masculine or feminine.
Yeah.
And these messages often translate into very specific product preferences and purchasing patterns.
Our textbook even mentions how products can be used to reinforce or challenge those roles.
Absolutely.
High heels were brought up as an interesting example.
Exactly. They're often associated with femininity and attractiveness. Even though they can be quite impractical and even uncomfortable,
Right.
it demonstrates how complex these influences can be.
Now let's shift gears and talk about culture, a force that shapes our consumption in ways we often don't even realize.
Yeah.
Our textbook dives into the concept of rituals and how they intertwine with consumption.
Rituals, by definition, are symbolic actions with a fixed sequence, often repeated over time.
Oh, okay.
And they're not just about special occasions.
Right.
Think about your everyday routines, your morning coffee ritual,
Yeah.
your Sunday brunch tradition.
Mhm.
Even something as simple as brewing a cup of tea can be a ritual.
And these rituals, you're saying, are tied to consumer behavior.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Rituals often involve specific products.
Okay.
That special tea blend for your evening wind down, that brand of athletic wear you always wear to the gym.
Right.
These products become part of the ritualistic experience, adding to its significance.
It makes you realize how deeply intertwined our daily routines are with the products we choose.
And then we have those grander rituals,
Yeah.
weddings, birthdays, holidays.
Right.
These are often marked by very specific consumption patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Gifts, special foods, decorations.
Yeah.
These rituals give structure to our lives, and often those products play a key role in those symbolic moments.
It's like they become a tangible representation of those intangible cultural values.
And speaking of cultural values, let's move on to the topic of globalization and the rise of global consumer culture.
Right.
We live in an increasingly interconnected world where brands and trends transcend borders.
Right.
But does this mean we're all becoming homogenized global consumers?
That's such an interesting question.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, are we all on our way to having identical shopping lists no matter where we live in the world?
It's not quite that simple.
Yeah.
While globalization has definitely led to a convergence of some consumer preferences,
Okay.
cultural differences remain significant,
Right.
and marketers face real challenges when trying to standardize their strategies across different countries.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach?
Not at all. Even within Europe, which has a shared history and many common values, there are distinct cultural nuances that influence consumer behavior.
Right.
For instance, the way people consume cheese in France versus Ireland is very different, reflecting different cultural attitudes towards food and tradition.
So even in a globalized world, understanding local culture is crucial for marketers.
Yeah. Now, our textbook also delves into case studies that bring all these concepts to life.
Yeah.
These real-world examples are where things get really interesting.
These case studies provide a fascinating glimpse into the psychology behind purchasing decisions.
Right.
It's like peering into the minds of consumers and seeing these theories in action.
Our first case study explores pram purchases in Denmark.
Oh, okay.
You might think buying a pram is a purely practical decision,
Yeah.
but this study reveals a whole other layer of complexity at play.
What's intriguing is how the pram becomes an extension of the mother's identity,
Mm-hmm.
representing her aspirations for her child and her transition into motherhood.
Okay.
It becomes a symbol of her new role, laden with emotion and personal meaning.
It's far more than just a mode of transportation for the baby.
Precisely. And the study also highlights the rituals surrounding the purchase,
Mm-hmm.
the meticulous research, the comparisons, even the visualization of herself pushing the pram with her child. It shows how even seemingly mundane purchases can be imbued with symbolic meaning and ritualistic behavior.
Now, our next case study examines something many people grapple with: low-fat food consumption.
Okay.
You might assume that people who buy low-fat foods are primarily motivated by health concerns.
Right.
However, this study found that's not always the case.
So there's more to it than just wanting to be healthy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Some participants admitted to buying low-fat options simply because they believed they tasted better,
Okay.
or because they felt pressure to conform to societal expectations around dieting.
Right.
Their motivations were complex, intertwining personal preferences, social pressures, and perceived health benefits.
It highlights how our motivations aren't always straightforward and can be influenced by a complex interplay of factors.
Absolutely.
Now, shifting gears to a case study that examines the grocery shopping habits of low-income consumers.
Okay.
It uncovers how socioeconomic factors can significantly impact access to healthy choices.
This study reveals a disparity in access to fresh produce and healthy options, often forcing low-income consumers to rely on convenience stores or fast food restaurants, where cheaper but less nutritious choices are more readily available.
Mm-hmm.
Their purchasing decisions are significantly shaped by their environment and socioeconomic circumstances.
It really underscores the fact that our choices aren't always made in a vacuum.
Exactly. Our environment, our resources, and our social context all play a role.
Now, for a fascinating look into the psychological tactics used in advertising, our next case study explores the use of archetypes and how they tap into our unconscious desires.
Archetypes.
Archetypes. That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Archetypes are these universal symbolic representations of characters and stories that resonate deeply within our psyche.
Okay.
Think about the hero, the rebel, the caregiver.
Right.
These archetypes tap into our primal instincts and emotions, often without us even realizing it.
So how do advertisers use these archetypes to influence us?
The study highlighted in our textbook used the Cinderella archetype to see how it affected consumer perceptions of a product. They showed participants different versions of an ad, some featuring imagery and narratives that evoked the Cinderella story,
Right.
and others that were more neutral.
And what were the results?
The ads that leveraged the Cinderella archetype were significantly more effective at creating positive associations and purchase intent.
Wow.
Even though participants weren't always consciously aware of the connection, it shows the power of these unconscious triggers.
It's like these archetypal stories are hardwired into our brains, influencing us on a subconscious level. Now, our final case study for this part of our deep dive explores the world of brand communities and how they can unite consumers who share a passion for a particular brand.
This is where tribal marketing comes into play.
Okay.
Think about Harley-Davidson riders
Hmm.
or Apple devotees.
Right.
They're not just buying products, they're joining a community, a tribe of like-minded individuals who share their enthusiasm.
So it goes beyond just a transactional relationship with a company.
Absolutely. The study demonstrates how these brand communities foster a sense of belonging and identity, often going beyond the products themselves.
Hmm.
It taps into our innate social needs and desires for connection and shared experiences.
It's like finding your tribe through shared brand loyalty.
Yeah.
What a fascinating concept. Well, that concludes part one of our deep dive into consumer behavior.
Wow.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the basic building blocks of consumer attitudes to the complexities of cultural influences and the power of archetypes.
Yeah, we really
A lot to think about.
Yeah, a lot to think about. We've got 2 more parts coming, so stay tuned.
And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, bye.
Welcome back to our deep dive into consumer behavior. In part one, we explored the foundations of why we buy the things we do. Now let's take it a step further and delve into the fascinating realm of how we actually make those choices.
You know, thinking back to those case studies, it really highlights how much goes on beneath the surface when we make even simple purchases. You're absolutely right. The traditional view of decision-making, that we're these perfectly rational beings weighing pros and cons, doesn't quite capture the full picture.
Right.
In reality, our choices are influenced by a whole host of factors, many of which operate below our conscious awareness.
So are you saying we're not as in control of our choices as we might think?
It's not about being out of control, but rather recognizing that our decisions are shaped by a complex interplay of rational thought, emotional responses, and even subconscious influences. Think about the last time you were choosing a movie to watch. Did you meticulously compare ratings and reviews, or did you go with a gut feeling, a recommendation, or even just a catchy title?
Okay, you got me there. I definitely don't always do a deep analysis before hitting play. But if we're not always rational actors, how do we even begin to make sense of the decision-making process?
One key concept is the evoked set. This is the limited group of brands or products that come to mind when you're considering a purchase. Let's say you're in the market for a new pair of running shoes. Your evoked set might include brands like Nike, Adidas, or maybe ASICS, depending on your past experiences, exposure to advertising, and recommendations from friends.
So these are the brands that are top of mind, the ones we automatically consider.
Exactly. And marketers invest heavily in trying to get their brands into our evoked sets.
Yeah.
Because if they're not even on our radar, they're out of the game. It's all about being part of the consideration set.
I guess it makes sense. If we don't even know about a product, we're certainly not going to buy it. But once we've got our evoked set, what happens next? How do we actually narrow it down and make that final decision?
That's where our evaluation criteria come into play. We start assessing the options based on factors that are important to us.
Okay.
These could be practical considerations like price, features, or functionality,
Mm-hmm.
but they can also be more emotional, like brand image, social status, or even how a product makes us feel.
So our decision-making criteria are kind of like a personal checklist.
You can think of it that way. But the tricky part is that those checklist items can change depending on the product and the situation. When buying a car, safety and reliability might be top priorities. But for a pair of sunglasses, style and brand might take center stage. And here's where marketers really get savvy, trying to influence those criteria by emphasizing certain features or benefits.
So it's about being aware of those tactics and not letting ourselves be swayed by clever marketing.
Absolutely. Being a conscious consumer means understanding the forces that are shaping our choices.
Mm.
Now, even after we've carefully evaluated our options, the final purchase decision can still involve a degree of irrationality.
So we're not always these perfectly logical decision makers.
Let's just say logic isn't always the driving force.
Yeah.
Sometimes a gut feeling, a sudden urge, or even the color of the packaging can tip the scales. And that's okay. We're human, not robots.
It's liberating to acknowledge that, isn't it? Now, speaking of human nature, emotions play a huge role in our behavior, and consumer behavior is no exception.
You're absolutely right. Emotions can be powerful drivers of our choices, especially when it comes to brand loyalty. Think about those brands you have a strong affinity for, the ones you go back to time and time again. even if there are cheaper or more convenient options available.
Oh, I definitely have a few of those. There's this one coffee shop, I won't name names, but I'm completely devoted to their brand. Their coffee is good, but I think it's more than that. I love their vibe, their values, even their logo makes me happy.
That's a great example of how emotions can intertwine with brand loyalty. It's that sense of connection, trust, even affection for a brand that keeps us coming back. And marketers know this, which is why they invest so much in creating brands that resonate with us on an emotional level.
It's like building a relationship almost.
Exactly. And they use a variety of strategies to foster that connection, storytelling, compelling imagery, music that evokes certain feelings, even partnering with celebrities or influencers we admire.
So it's about recognizing those tactics and making sure our emotions are working for us, not being exploited.
Right. Being a savvy consumer means understanding the emotional landscape of branding. Now let's move on to another powerful force in consumer behavior. Social influence. We're inherently social creatures, and our decisions are constantly shaped by the people around us, whether we're conscious of it or not.
I know, I'm definitely susceptible to what my friends are buying or raving about.
Yeah, it's perfectly natural. We look to others for information, guidance, and validation, especially when it comes to products or services we're unfamiliar with. Think about online reviews, recommendations from friends, or even just observing what others are buying or wearing. These social cues give us valuable information and help us navigate the marketplace.
So we're kind of crowdsourcing our decision making.
In a way, yes. And there are different types of social influence at play. One is informational influence, where we seek out the expertise or experiences of others to inform our own choices. Think about reading restaurant reviews before making a reservation or asking a tech-savvy friend for advice on buying a new laptop.
Makes sense. We trust the opinions of people we perceive as knowledgeable or trustworthy. But what about when it's less about information and more about fitting in?
That's where normative influence comes in. This is when we conform to the norms of a group, whether it's our friends, family, or even society at large, because we want to be accepted or avoid social rejection.
Like wearing a certain brand of clothing because it's popular, even if you're not personally crazy about the style.
Exactly. We're social animals, and the desire to belong is deeply ingrained. This type of influence can be particularly powerful for young people who are still developing their sense of identity and trying to find their place in the social hierarchy.
It's a reminder to always check in with ourselves and make sure we're making choices that align with our own values and preferences, not just succumbing to social pressure.
And a particularly potent form of social influence is word-of-mouth marketing. This is when consumers share their experiences and opinions about products with others, whether it's through face-to-face conversations, online reviews, or social media posts.
It's like the digital age version of a town square where everyone's sharing their recommendations and warnings.
Precisely. And because we tend to trust the opinions of people we know and respect, even if it's just a stranger online who seems to share our tastes, word of mouth can be incredibly persuasive.
It's no wonder companies are so focused on online reviews and influencer marketing. They recognize the power of those personal testimonials.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Positive word of mouth can be a game changer for a brand. And speaking of influential voices, there's a special category of people called opinion leaders. These are individuals who are highly knowledgeable and influential within a particular domain, and their opinions carry a lot of weight.
Think of tech bloggers who review the latest gadgets, fashion influencers who showcase the hottest trends, or even just that friend everyone goes to for restaurant recommendations.
Exactly. These opinion leaders have cultivated a reputation for being trustworthy and insightful, and their recommendations can sway the opinions of countless consumers. They're like walking, talking endorsements, and marketers are constantly vying for their attention.
It's like having a personal amplifier for your message. So it's important to be aware of who these opinion leaders are and to critically evaluate their influence.
Right. It's about recognizing that not all opinions are created equal. Some are driven by genuine enthusiasm and expertise, while others might be motivated by financial incentives or other agendas. As consumers, we need to be discerning and make sure we're getting our information from reliable sources.
Now, switching gears a bit, let's talk about a fundamental element that shapes our entire consumer experience. Culture. Culture is like an invisible hand that guides our values, beliefs, and behaviors. And its influence on our consumption patterns is profound, even if we're not always aware of it.
It's like the water we swim in. We don't always notice it, but it's all
Mhm.
around us, shaping our perceptions and our choices.
Different cultures have different norms and expectations around consumption. What's considered a status symbol in one culture might be seen as tacky in another. A marketing campaign that resonates in one country could fall completely flat in another if it doesn't align with local cultural values. It's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to understanding consumer behavior.
And speaking of cultural influences, let's dive into the fascinating world of rituals. These symbolic behaviors, often repeated in a specific sequence, are deeply ingrained in our lives, and they often involve consumption in meaningful ways.
From our daily routines to those special occasions that mark our lives, rituals give structure and significance to our experiences.
Think about your morning coffee ritual, the way you carefully grind the beans, brew the perfect cup, maybe even savor it with a particular pastry, or while reading a certain section of the newspaper. It's a simple act, but it's infused with personal meaning and habitual behaviors.
It's those little routines that often bring a sense of comfort and stability to our lives.
And then we have those grander rituals that mark significant life events, weddings, graduations, religious ceremonies. These are often steeped in tradition, and symbolism and consumption plays a key role in expressing those cultural values.
Think about the specific foods we eat during holidays, the gifts we exchange for birthdays and anniversaries, even the clothes we wear for certain occasions. These are all expressions of cultural norms and shared values.
Exactly. And marketers often try to tap into those rituals by positioning their products as essential elements of those celebrations.
Like how champagne is often associated with New Year's Eve, or how certain brands of chocolate become synonymous with Valentine's Day.
They've successfully woven their products into the fabric of those cultural traditions.
It's a reminder to be aware of those influences and to make sure we're not just blindly following cultural scripts, but rather making choices that genuinely align with our own values and preferences.
Now, within the realm of rituals, gift giving holds a special place in consumer behavior. It's a social act, laden with meaning, a way to express love, appreciation, obligation, or even social status.
Gift giving can be a minefield, though, can't it? There are so many unwritten rules and expectations, especially when it comes to different cultures.
You're absolutely right. What's considered an appropriate gift in one culture might be seen as offensive or inappropriate in another. For instance, in some cultures, giving a clock as a gift is associated with bad luck or even death.
It's a reminder to be mindful of those cultural nuances, especially when giving gifts to people from different backgrounds.
And beyond cultural considerations, gift giving taps into our emotional landscape. It's a way to build relationships, strengthen social bonds, and communicate a whole range of emotions.
It's not just about the material object itself, it's about the thought, the effort, the symbolism behind it.
Precisely. A well-chosen gift can convey a depth of emotion that words sometimes can't capture. And on the flip side, a poorly chosen gift can send the wrong message entirely.
It's a reminder to be thoughtful and to consider the recipient's interests, preferences, and the overall context of the relationship when choosing a gift.
And in recent years, we've seen the rise of self-gifting, which adds another interesting dimension to consumer behavior.
Self-gifting, so buying presents for ourselves.
Exactly. It's a way to reward ourselves, celebrate a personal milestone, or simply lift our spirits. It can be a form of self-care, a way to acknowledge our own needs and desires.
I'm definitely guilty of a little self-gifting now and then.
And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's done in a healthy and balanced way. It's when self-gifting becomes excessive or leads to financial problems that it can become a concern.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between treating ourselves and staying financially responsible.
And speaking of responsibility, let's transition to a topic that's becoming increasingly important in the world of consumer behavior: sustainability.
Sustainability is a big buzzword these days, but it's more than just a trend, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a growing awareness that our consumption choices have consequences not just for ourselves, but for the planet and future generations. More and more consumers are looking for eco-friendly products, and they're willing to pay a premium for brands that prioritize sustainability.
And companies are taking notice too. There seems to be a wave of brands promoting their eco-credentials and touting their sustainable practices.
It's encouraging to see, but it's important to be wary of greenwashing, where companies make false or exaggerated claims about their environmental efforts. As conscious consumers, we need to be discerning and do our research to make sure the brands we're supporting are walking the talk.
So it's about looking beyond the marketing slogans and really digging into a company's practices and commitments.
Exactly. And sustainability isn't just about buying eco-friendly products, it's about a shift in mindset, a willingness to reevaluate our consumption habits and reduce our overall environmental impact.
Thinking about the bigger picture, our collective choices really do make a difference.
Absolutely. Small changes, like reducing our reliance on single-use plastics, supporting local farmers markets, or choosing to repair or upcycle items instead of discarding them, can have a cumulative positive impact.
Yeah.
It's about making conscious decisions that align with our values and contribute to a more sustainable future.
Now let's shift gears to a trend that's been gaining momentum, especially in the wake of recent global events:
Yeah.
the rise of the experience economy.
We're seeing a shift in consumer priorities, with more and more people placing greater value on experiences over material possessions. Travel, concerts, festivals, unique dining experiences. These are the things people are increasingly choosing to spend their money on.
It's like that saying, collect moments, not things.
Exactly. And this trend is fueled by several factors, including the rise of social media, where people are constantly sharing their experiences and seeking validation through likes and comments.
It's like social currency. Those Instagram-worthy moments become a way to connect with others and build a personal brand.
And beyond social media, there's a growing desire for authenticity, connection, and personal growth that's driving the experience economy. People are craving experiences that are unique, meaningful, and memorable, something that transcends the fleeting satisfaction of acquiring a new gadget or piece of clothing.
It's about creating memories and stories, not just adding to our collection of stuff.
Precisely. And this trend has significant implications for marketers. It's no longer enough to simply sell a product. Companies need to find ways to create experiences that are engaging, immersive, and shareable.
It's about crafting a whole lifestyle around a brand, not just a transaction.
Think about companies like Red Bull, which has built an entire universe of extreme sports, adventure, and music events around its energy drink. They're not just selling a beverage, they're selling an attitude, a way of life, a community of shared experiences.
It's brilliant marketing. They've tapped into that deep human desire for connection and belonging.
And as consumers, we're becoming more discerning and demanding. We want more than just a product. We want an experience, a story, a sense of connection.
Well, that wraps up part 2 of our deep dive into consumer behavior. We've journeyed through the complexities of decision-making, the power of emotions and social influence, and the ever-evolving trends that are shaping our consumption patterns. What a fascinating exploration.
And in part 3, we'll zoom out to the bigger picture, examining the broader social and cultural forces that are shaping the consumer landscape and exploring how we as individuals can navigate this complex world with greater awareness and intentionality. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into consumer behavior. In parts 1 and 2, we explored the individual factors that drive our choices. Everything from our basic needs and desires to the influence of emotions, social pressures, and all those fascinating cultural rituals that we often take for granted.
Yeah, we covered a lot, haven't we? It's really amazing how much goes into just buying a carton of milk sometimes.
It really is. But now I think it's time to step back and look at the bigger picture. Consider those larger forces that are shaping the consumer landscape. The trends that are kind of reshaping how we buy, sell, and interact with brands in this increasingly interconnected world.
Definitely. And I think one that comes to mind immediately is globalization.
Yeah.
In the previous parts, we talked about how brands and trends now transcend borders. But what are the implications of this global consumer culture? Is it all good or all bad, or is it somewhere in between?
Yeah, it's kind of a loaded question.
It is.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
definitely a complex issue with both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, globalization can lead to greater access to goods and services,
Sure.
increased innovation as ideas are shared across cultures, and a breakdown of traditional barriers. Think about how e-commerce has allowed us to purchase products from virtually anywhere in the world.
That's true. I can order spices from India, clothes from Italy, and books from practically anywhere with just a few clicks.
Oh, exactly.
But as we touched on in part 1, doesn't globalization also raise concerns about cultural homogenization, kind of like flattening out those differences?
It does. That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
As global brands gain prominence, there's a risk that local traditions and values and even businesses can be overshadowed.
Right.
It raises questions about maintaining cultural diversity and supporting local economies in the face of these global giants.
So it's like finding that balance, right? Enjoying the benefits of a global marketplace, but also preserving those unique cultural nuances that make our world so rich and interesting.
Yeah. Finding that sweet spot.
Exactly. Now, speaking of interconnectedness, another major force that's shaping the consumer landscape is technology. We've already talked about how social media influences our choices, but what about the broader impact of technology on how we shop and, interact with brands?
I mean, technology has revolutionized consumer behavior in countless ways.
Yeah.
Think about the rise of e-commerce, personalized recommendations driven by algorithms, and the ability to compare prices and product reviews instantly.
Oh, yeah.
We have more information at our fingertips than ever before.
It's true. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of choices.
Information overload.
Yes, information overload. How do we even begin to navigate this, constantly evolving technological landscape?
It can be tough. That's where critical thinking and digital literacy become essential skills. We
Right.
need to be discerning about the information we consume online.
Mm.
Question the sources and be aware of how algorithms and personalized marketing can shape our perceptions and preferences.
It's almost like we need to become more savvy digital detectives,
Yes,
constantly questioning and evaluating the information we're bombarded with.
absolutely.
Now, thinking back to everything we've discussed in this deep dive, what are some key takeaways for listeners who want to be, more mindful and intentional about their consumer choices?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It all starts with self-awareness.
Okay.
Take the time to reflect on your own motivations, values, and triggers. What are the things that make you reach for your wallet? What messages resonate with you most deeply? Once you understand your own patterns and vulnerabilities, you can start making more conscious decisions.
It's like taking a personal inventory of your consumption habits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And from there, you can set boundaries. Maybe it's limiting your exposure to certain types of advertising, unsubscribing from tempting email lists, or being more mindful of the social media accounts you follow. It's about curating your consumer experience to align with your values.
It's about taking control of our consumption rather than letting it control us.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of collective action. Supporting ethical and sustainable brands, boycotting companies that engage in harmful practices, or even just talking to your friends and family about these issues, these actions can create ripples of change.
It's a reminder that as consumers, we have a voice and a choice, and those choices have a real impact.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So as we wrap up this final part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question. In a world saturated with marketing messages and ever-evolving consumption trends, what values do you want to guide your purchasing decisions? What kind of impact do you want to have through your consumer choices?
It's definitely something to think about.
We've explored those psychological forces at play, the cultural influences that shape our perceptions and the ever-changing landscape of the marketplace. And we hope this journey has given you a deeper understanding of not just why you buy, but how you can make choices that align with your values, your well-being, and a more sustainable future. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into consumer behavior.
Yes, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.